At 86, Tom Brokaw has officially run out of reasons to stay quiet. He is the last of a dying breed, the man who stood at the Berlin Wall as history crumbled around him and delivered the news of a changing world with the calm authority of someone who had truly seen everything. For decades, he kept his professional opinions about the current generation of television journalists neatly tucked away in what you might call a polite, corporate box. But lately, that box has flown open. The legend is finally speaking up about Savannah Guthrie, and what he has to say is anything but lukewarm. When Brokaw looks at Guthrie, he does not simply see a morning show host filling airtime between commercial breaks. He sees a revolution wearing a power suit. Sources close to the veteran anchor suggest he has been describing her behind closed doors as having the legal brain of a prosecutor and the relatability of a neighbor, and coming from Tom Brokaw, that is genuinely the highest possible praise a person in this industry can receive. Tom was always the man who demanded straight facts delivered with the force of a compelling story. He wanted the truth, and he wanted it told well. In Savannah, he recognizes someone who can grill a sitting world leader until they visibly squirm, then pivot effortlessly to a segment about the best air fryer recipes on the market without losing a single ounce of her credibility. That particular tightrope walk is something Brokaw deeply respects, because he spent half a century walking his own version of it every single night on national television. But this story is not simply about professional admiration from one broadcaster to another. The road between the Brokaw era and the Guthrie era was never smooth. It was more like a distracted drive through a long construction zone. When Matt Lauer's career imploded spectacularly in 2017, NBC News looked less like the powerhouse it had always been and more like a ship rapidly taking on water. The house that Brokaw had spent decades helping to build was shaking at its foundations. He watched from a distance, from his ranch far removed from the synthetic glow of Studio 1A, as Savannah stepped directly into that wreckage without flinching. He watched her absorb the hits, navigate the painfully awkward on-air moments, handle the public grief and institutional embarrassment, and somehow keep the entire operation from going under. His recent words about her are not a critique dressed in polite language. They are a full validation. He is essentially saying, "I see exactly what you did there, and it was something extraordinary." What Brokaw has come to recognize, perhaps more than anything else, is that Savannah had to do something he never truly had to do himself: be openly and publicly vulnerable. In Tom's era, if an anchor showed genuine emotion on air, viewers instinctively assumed something catastrophic had occurred. The anchor was meant to be the steady, unshakable presence that told you everything would be manageable. Crying was practically forbidden. Doubt was invisible. In Savannah's world, however, if you fail to show genuine humanity and warmth, the audience simply picks up their phone and moves on to the next screen. His willingness to praise her for this fundamental shift in approach signals clearly that he is not the grumpy old-timer sitting on the porch and longing for a past that cannot return. He genuinely understands that the voice of God has been replaced by the voice of a friend, and he has made a quiet, considered peace with that evolution. To fully understand just how significant Brokaw's endorsement actually is, you have to understand the world he came from and what it demanded of him. Tom grew up in South Dakota, about as far from the neon lights and relentless energy of 30 Rock as a person can get without leaving the planet entirely. He had a voice that seemed architecturally designed for radio before he had even finished school, and a restless frontier spirit that refused to be contained within any ordinary 9-to-5 career. He worked his way up through local stations, learning early and the hard way that in the news business, if you are not first, you are essentially already extinct. By the time he arrived in the major leagues, journalism's golden age was just beginning to take shape, and Tom was right there in the kitchen as it baked. The newsroom of that era was nothing remotely like the glass and chrome studios of today. It was loud, chaotic, perpetually smoke-filled, and utterly unforgiving to anyone who was not absolutely certain of themselves. Teleprompters failed constantly, there were no digital tools for instant fact-checking, and nobody had a social media team carefully managing their public image. It was raw, competitive, and driven by ego in a way that only genuinely high-stakes environments ever produce. Tom thrived inside all of it. He had a remarkable and almost supernatural ability to remain composed and steady while the world around him caught fire. Whether he was covering the slow-burning scandal of Watergate, the visceral heartbreak of Vietnam, or the stunning historic moment when the Iron Curtain finally began to tear apart in Eastern Europe. He became one of the big three alongside Peter Jennings and Dan Rather, and those three men were the effective arbiters of reality for well over 100 million Americans every evening. If Brokaw said something happened, it happened. There was a gravity and a finality to the role that is almost impossible to explain to anyone who grew up with news alerts buzzing on their wrist. The price of that status was enormous and rarely visible to the public. He spent years missing birthdays, holidays spent alone in hotel rooms in countries most viewers could not locate on a map, carrying the constant crushing pressure of being the most informed and reliable person in the room at all times. There was no such thing as a bad day when the entire country turned to you the moment a national crisis erupted. You had to be bulletproof, always. And yet, even the most golden era eventually has to close. As the internet arrived and the 24-hour news cycle took hold, the slow and deliberate rhythm of the evening broadcast began to feel increasingly like a relic from a gentler time. When Brokaw finally stepped down from the nightly news desk in 2004, it genuinely felt like the closing of a significant American chapter. People mourned it. But Tom did not simply vanish into retirement. He stayed present, watching as the industry he loved began to fracture, and as a sharp, determined young lawyer named Savannah Guthrie started making serious waves in the very building where he had constructed his entire legacy. Savannah's rise was nothing like Tom's, and that difference was precisely the point. She came to journalism through law, trained as a litigator who could identify the fatal crack in a witness's argument before they had even finished forming their sentence. When she traded the courtroom for the newsroom, she brought that relentless, exacting energy into a world that was still slowly and awkwardly getting comfortable with women in positions of real authority at the top. She did not walk into 30 Rock and receive any kind of warm institutional embrace. She earned every single inch of ground she stood on, starting with the thoroughly unglamorous work of early career reporting, standing in freezing drizzle outside the White House at 4 a.m, waiting for press secretaries who were almost certainly going to mislead her regardless of how long she waited. What set her apart from the beginning was a rare and genuinely unusual combination of intellectual firepower and accessible warmth. She could break down a complex Supreme Court ruling in plain, conversational language over what felt like a friendly drink, then turn around in the same hour and trap a seasoned politician inside their own contradictions with the precision of a surgeon. When she formally joined the Today Show in 2011, the program was already navigating a turbulent internal transition. And then came the 2017 Lauer scandal, which did not merely shake the building, it nearly brought the entire structure down to the ground. That moment became Savannah's most defining trial by fire. Sitting at the anchor desk alongside Hoda Kotb, she did something that was almost without precedent for someone in her position. She was completely and disarmingly honest. She did not reach for a polished corporate script or hide behind the comfortable distance of professional objectivity. She admitted, on live national television, that she was heartbroken, genuinely confused, and processing the news in real time alongside the millions of viewers watching at home. It was a masterclass in what modern leadership actually looks like under pressure. She was not simply reporting on what had happened. She was living through it with the audience, in full view, without a safety net. That particular morning marked the true and lasting beginning of the Savannah Guthrie era. She proceeded to fundamentally redefine what a morning television host could actually be. Before her, the role effectively required you to choose a lane and stay in it, serious journalist or warm lifestyle personality. Savannah simply refused to accept that limitation. One day she would be at a major national political convention, navigating genuine chaos and sharp controversy. The next she would be back in the studio, laughing easily through a segment about organizing your home. The range was extraordinary, and even the most determined skeptics within the industry eventually had to acknowledge it. She was not trying to become the female version of Tom Brokaw. She was busy becoming the first and only Savannah Guthrie, which turned out to be something the audience wanted far more. Beyond the professional arc, both Brokaw and Guthrie carry private struggles that have quietly but profoundly shaped the people they are on screen. In 2013, Tom was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a form of blood cancer that does not negotiate with Emmy Awards or legendary careers. The man who had calmly reported from active war zones was suddenly confronting something deeply personal and entirely outside his control. In characteristic form, he did not retreat into privacy. He wrote about it, spoke about it openly, and faced his own mortality with the same clear-eyed honesty he had always brought to his reporting. He began spending more time at his Montana ranch, finding a different and quieter kind of meaning that did not require a satellite uplink or a studio countdown. But that peace required him to surrender the identity that had defined him for 60 years, and for a man who had lived entirely on the adrenaline of breaking news, that was a profound and difficult psychic shift. Savannah's challenges arrived in a different shape entirely. Her path to motherhood involved IVF, significant medical risk, and the particular and rarely acknowledged exhaustion of trying to build a family later in life while simultaneously running one of the most demanding jobs in the entire television industry. She has spoken candidly about the guilt that comes with being a working mother at that level, the relentless mental juggling act of preparing to interview heads of state while quietly worrying in the back of her mind about whether her child's fever had broken overnight. And then came the accident in which a young son struck her eye with a toy train, an injury that required multiple surgeries and weeks of enforced recovery in near total darkness, with no guarantee that a career built entirely on seeing and being seen would survive intact. She returned to the desk wearing glasses and, entirely true to her character, told the story to her audience rather than concealing it behind a carefully managed public statement. This shared experience of public life colliding violently with private pain is where Brokaw and Guthrie find their deepest and most genuine connection, despite the 40 years that separate them. They both understand, from hard personal experience, that the polished exterior of the professional anchor eventually cracks under real pressure. What matters is not whether it cracks, it always does, but how you carry yourself forward once it has. When Brokaw speaks about her resilience, he is not offering a talking point. He is recognizing a fellow survivor in the truest sense of the word. What his endorsement ultimately acknowledges is that the world of the anchor he once embodied is fundamentally and irreversibly gone. The granite desk and the voice of God have been replaced by a glass table and an ongoing conversation. Authenticity has replaced objectivity as the primary currency of public trust. Savannah Guthrie did not simply adapt to that new reality, she helped define it. And when Tom Brokaw, the man who narrated the end of one century, speaks up to say she is the real thing, the industry stops and listens.